Youth anxiety has hit its highest recorded levels.
Loneliness among teenagers has nearly doubled since 2020. Dr. Arvinder Singh is a psychotherapist and UN consultant.
She knows what the data says and she knows what it misses.
If we didn't let our children crawl and fall, as human beings, I think they would even be able to walk.
Yeah.
But when there is a diagnosis of our child, we become overprotective. We say, no, I'm not going to let any, judgment or any stigma come onto my child.
Yes.
But that can be counterproductive.
Right.
Just like a container doesn't really judge whether you're pouring water, oil, or milk or whatever, it just takes it till it can. Similarly, as a parent, I think if we can be emotional containers to our child where we don't say, oh, but why are you feeling like that? And we've brought you up differently and we don't expect. So there's a lot of judgment that comes because we're judging ourselves very harshly. As a parent, if we can just be emotional containers to our child where we just listen to them with whatever they are bringing without really putting in our judgment, opinion, or anxieties into it.
Welcome, Dr. Arvinder Singh. How are you?
Thank you. Very well. Thank you. And thank you for picking up such a pertinent topic that I think all of us are grappling with.
What is the thing parents believe about their teenagers' mental health, which is mostly consistently wrong?
One of the things that I think parents, especially parents who think that they are very involved in their children's lives, when they think that if my child had a problem, they'd come and talk to me. I'm the closest to my child. They tell me so many things. And there's a difference there because children may tell you, your child may tell you at the day-to-day, met this one, happened that, whatever, but they may not really be sharing the deepest emotions for two reasons. One is that, there's this unspoken code of kind of communication where you don't talk about certain kind of things.
Yeah.
For example, gender identity. Growing up, if you're grappling with something like that, and if you sense that your parent may not be very open or receptive to it, or if there's dysfunctionality in the family. So the child does not, even though they are close to a parent, they won't really talk the deepest feelings, as it were, like the deepest, darkest secrets, as children would say, So they would hesitate in speaking that. So when a parent thinks, so my child tells me all, is it that is it information that you have that where are they going and what does the day look like and what are the subjects they're choosing, or do they really talk about the emotions? So that is something that I found that a lot of parents say, especially when there's a crisis that hits that, but we talk about everything. They could have spoken to me. I never sensed that. It never was. And especially in case of when I say crisis, it's also like severe self-harm and all, Another reason why children may not really open up to a parent is also because they don't want to upset them. So if a parent is fragile or has a mental health concern, children also don't want to burden them with their stories. So I think the biggest myth, other than many more that may be there, is when a parent thinks that my child tells me everything.
You didn't study this system from the outside. You built it. Ashoka students come from families already doing everything right. Informed parents, therapy-positive households, the language in place, and they still filled the waiting rooms. What does that tell us about the awareness as a solution today?
Just a bit of a background on Ashoka's student profile. It has a segment of student that you spoke about, but diversity is really, the cornerstone at Ashoka. The problem still remains because of a couple of things. One is no matter how much you know, you still are never prepared for that emotional kind of response to a situation. If I talk about a residential university, people are transitioning, the students are coming from their homes to a new city, from school to university. So there's a lot that's going on, which brings that kind of conundrum of what should I do? And of course, universities these days are offering a lot. There is a lot of academic rigor. So there are always going to be a lot of factors that are going to be playing, and navigating these spaces is going to be a challenge. So transition at any stage in life has its own set of challenges, and I think at this stage of moving from high school to university, it has a lot more because you're also grappling with your identity, your freedom, and so much more. So I think even the awareness actually helps you in a way that as soon as something happens, you feel a little different, and there is a service, and you want to go and seek that help and support. It helps everyday stress or a normal, natural kind of stress response from becoming a distress or a crisis. So that's how the landscape is, as I see.
Let's move on a little bit and let's talk about what actually changed. Okay, like for example, when we were teenagers and say I had a bad day, I left it at that. It was a bad day, came home, ate your food, cuddled with your mother, went to sleep. Now, I mean, it didn't follow me into school every morning, but now the minute something bad happens to one of these kids, it's all over social media. It just doesn't leave them. So what happens developmentally to a young teenager or a young student person, kid, when every single bad day has a potential audience of his nearest and dearest or hers?
Classically, if we see that, culturally in India especially, when a child came home, some parent figure would be there.
Yes.
So you weren't comparing yourself with millions of people. You were probably just comparing yourself with maybe 10 other friends.
To say this, that when we were kids, thankfully, we didn't have this onslaught of this constant visibility and judgment, on both sides.
What is it that they're most afraid of?
The deepest fear would be, what if the real me is not good enough? Not being enough. It's a very big theme, whether it's appearance, grades, achievement, popularity. And because look at the benchmarks. A 10-year-old is worried about the complexion, the color, the appearance, skincare starts as early as that. So you keep moving away from your core because it's, the benchmark is so many others who you have on a day-to-day basis nothing to do with in the real time. But virtually, they're really impacting your life so much.
So true. Another thing, when we were growing up, like peer pressure, okay, it was a tangible thing. I remember our headmistress at Welham, every assembly, she used to say, remember, never succumb to peer pressure and mob instinct. I'm against mob instinct and peer pressure. It was a thing because you could identify it and you could put safeguards or rails around the edges of what peer pressure looked like when we were growing up. What does it look like today, this peer pressure?
Yeah, since we are on the topic of social media, you know that it's not just the peers that you are going to school with or going to university with. It's like that whole world. So the pressures from all sides. And I really want to step back a little and say, I mean, why youngsters? Look at the peer pressure that each one of us also faces. I mean, I hear young mothers talking about the kind of classes they're taking their children to, how many things are happening, what school is your child going to, what are the, so there's a lot of peer pressure here as well. I mean, in terms of the size, it's more or less done, by in the early 6-7 years itself, more than 90% of it is done. But it's more the quality that changes, the way, which is why, when your teenager is asking you questions, you think that they are challenging you or they are being, rude. But actually, it's just that the brain is processing information differently. So there are millions of trillions of neurons and synapses. And whatever is being used during the early years as a child, those are getting strengthened. But during adolescent and pubescent and post-pubescent years, there's a lot of pruning happening, right? So those that are not being used are sort of dying and dropping in. So it's the quality of the brain that's changing. So Piaget calls it the stage of formal operations, which means this brain can now think in abstractions. So they are going to question identity. And of course, because, secondary sexual characters are also coming up, so the gender identity becomes so important here. And I think figuring out who am I?
The non-stop crushes these days, then suddenly the appearances, they're like preening themselves and the appearance has to be a certain way and the texture powder in the hair and, so, yeah.
Yeah. So all of it, because it's naturally, there's a lot more preoccupants with, how you look, how you speak, how you appear, how popular are you, crushes and where they take you and, so much more. So I think this is where I see that the lot change in the quality, even though things may have started at the age of 8 and 9 and 10, but they play out a lot more soon after.
You're explaining this so nicely and it's landing. The undealable part is, as a parent, is that it seems to happen overnight. On one day they're fighting to come and cuddle with, and the next morning they're off.
Yeah,
but
this is the thing, right? I was just going to come to that it's us as parents, who need to contain those emotions, because this is their journey of growing up. In fact, looking around us, I think we try too hard. Is it that we make it a little worse for them? Do they have to deal with more than they're anyway dealing with? Because as parents, we've suddenly, we have the knowledge, we have the information, we don't want to be our parents growing up because we want to have that gap covered even more. Are we trying too hard as parents in today's generation? Actually, that's the question.
I don't know hard, but I think, every parent in every generation, tries to do the best. But I think as the parenting role is evolving, what is happening is there is, let me put it as this, in our parents' generation, probably, at least when I see, my parents and my uncles and aunts, the roles were very defined. Mm-hmm. And there are very few mothers that went out to work. And even when they did, they sort of, and I'm talking about large populations, I'm talking about cross numbers. So I think, so what would happen is there was a very clear role distinction. So the emotional parenting role largely was, the mother's domain, and the mother would sort of look at those things. The father had a certain kind of role. And I'm not saying that it was very hard and strict, but it was fairly clear. There was no role confusion. And I don't even want to talk about what we do today, because we all know what we do today. As both parents are super involved. Both parents want to be on top of things. And it's a lot of pressure on parents as well. I mean, look at how the education system and opportunities have changed, and how many times, and I know so many of my friends would talk about, oh, I'm so embarrassed, I can't help my class 8 or 9 child with math. And I said, but you're not supposed to. It's evolved, it's changed, and you can't be perfect in everything. But, as a mother, as a parent, as a father, what you want to do and what you can offer to your child. And not being able to do a math problem or a physics numerical is not the only thing that you should worry about. Just the role definition, the parenting has changed. And I think, in a way, we're also, because we are also exposed to so much, right? I mean, there is so much literature that we have access to, so much parenting styles, we have role models we have access to. So don't you think it's going to make us anxious? Of course. So we are also wanting to do the best that we can for our children, and that the best may involve comparing ourselves with other parents. And you and I both know that, comparison will always make you feel lesser.
Yeah. Before we go there, I want to also add one more point here, which is this constantly being in touch with our kids because of WhatsApp, because it's become so easy to communicate. We didn't do that when we were growing up. Have you reached? What have you eaten? What are you wearing? This is all added layers, that were not there a generation or two before. And this is constantly, keeping each other updated also adds another layer of anxiousness to some point.
We live in Singapore. We're lucky to have a country which is so safe.
Right.
But as a parent in today's India, for example,
Yeah.
and I'm sad to say this, but it's a fact. And again, with the advent of social media and communication and the fact that he's connected, and you have all kinds of people, the predators that used to be in the periphery physically are now stalking them, or whatever they could potentially be. So as a parent, and I know I do veer on the side of anxiety for sure, and I'm one of those who needs to be in touch all the time, good or bad. But if I was in India, I would need to know.
But you're in Singapore.
No, that's what I know. Here I'm controlled compared to what I'd be there. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying that maybe that need for constant touch is actually also a signal of the times. I don't know.
What do you think? I mean, India is there, but I think it adds a little bit more, for the kids to be doing on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's what you're wondering is, even though we are super connected to our children, and update is the word you used, being updated, and yes, you're right. When we were growing up, this updation wasn't happening, and there was a lot more trust, if I may bring trust as a factor as well, in the sense of trust not in your child, don't get me wrong there, but just generally trust in the fact that things will be fine. Small example, I remember my dad would go to work. My mother never called him up to check, have you reached? He had a phone in his office, right? So, or our whole day, she wouldn't worry, has he eaten, whatever. We knew that come 7 o'clock and dad will be home. And she wouldn't worry if it was, 7:15 or whatever. So there was a lot more trust in, your own self in the world around you. But I think right now, without really going into what the situations are around us, I think all of us, and our children more so, are grappling with what's happening in the world. It's impacting, where there's minute by minute information as well. So you're right, yes, but I'm talking about a difference here on being updated and informed versus the connection, versus the emotional containment. So that relationship is extremely important. And sometimes some of us busy parents who also have a lot going on in our lives, and also maybe sometimes feel guilty about not spending enough time with our children, we find the WhatsApp groups to be the second best choice. And because we know exactly where my child is, we feel I know my child very well. And there's a bit of a difference there. You know what they are doing, you're informed about that. But what are they going through? Do you really know? And that really is my question to the parents, that it's not about, sometimes people talk about quality or quality time. And I say, perfect, I 100% believe in that, but it has to be built on quantity time.
Okay.
It cannot be only something that you choose as quality, because sometimes even to open up, your child needs to really hang around enough to sort of trust you. And how often do you talk about yourself? Are you always very, you only very selectively share, which of course I know that we don't want to burden our children, but do we really talk about things that happen with us during the day, or other questions? How was your day? Great, wonderful, I mean, inane questions, silly question, and even sillier answer to it. Or do we really ask, do we mean to know what exactly was the day like, or do we want to be informed where were you all along? Because we have our own demons in our head about the safety of our children. I mean, it's a very real thing.
Yeah.
But I think connections.
You mentioned WhatsApp chats and being updated, etc. But yet there's so much loneliness, right?
Yeah, there is a lot of communication. There's over communication, 6 group chats, WhatsApp, Snapchat, sharing pictures, but yet they are lonely. How does that happen?
Yeah, great question. I think, the root cause of loneliness is actually lack of meaningful connections, fulfilling connections. So like on WhatsApp, you may be connected in the sense of updated and you know what's happening, but it has its limitation in terms of the meaningful connection. And I'm not just talking about only words. I'm sure you remember the time when you held your babies, uh, for the first time, that touch, or the fact that when your child, came in your arms and was suddenly just quiet and was lovely, or the emotion it gave you. I mean, look at you, with grown up children, you can still get into that emotional space. I mean, even the thought is having that endorphin release for you. So when our children have meaningful, fulfilling connections, that is what is.
So sorry.
Not at all. I mean, how can you apologize for the most beautiful emotion
Yeah.
of a parent?
Okay, moving on. The other thing that has exploded in the last decade, and we hear it all around it, is ADHD. So before we debate whether it's an epidemic or it's a diagnostic result, tell us what it is and what does a parent do once they hear this diagnosis, no matter whether it's a child or a teenager, or is it different ramifications at each stage? Just walk us through this.
Yeah. I think, more than understanding ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, if I were to decode the word.
Yes.
And as the word says, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. I think, and the word disorder is it's the frequency and it's the intensity that makes it into that, because some amount of our attention flitting from one thing to the other is quite normal as well. But that's a diagnosis. I think what is important that I bring here, because I know that all of you can read about that and there's enough
Yes.
and more that it provide, because more importantly is, what can we do? Because I do meet parents, I do meet people who just say diagnosis and all fine, but I don't want this to actually hamper what my child can do. And of course, there are all sorts of stories about some real geniuses who've had this disorder. So I think, this labeling is one thing, that if a parent really operates out of that lens, and it's different from diagnosis. Okay, so I'm not taking away from that. The diagnosis is important because it at least gives you, which direction to work in. But most important is the relationship with the child, because children who have any kind of mental health concern are also, or learning difficulties, or attention
Yes.
deficit, they have a very hard time at school, because very few people understand what that looks like or how it plays up, because in intelligence they are usually average, above average in intelligence. So there's no shortage there, there's no deficit there, but somehow they end up getting treated in a different way, or being labeled as such. What is important first for parents is to really accept, because it's, as I said, as parents, we start thinking, blaming, feeling guilty. So the first thing is to accept that bit, and then to say, how can I support my child so that the best comes? I mean, I've sometimes have parents who've sort of said, we have a diagnosis, but we do not. I mean, schools are very good, universities are very good with providing accommodations and so on. But a lot of the time, the child or the parent does not want that accommodation, saying that if I need it, I'll take it, but I don't want to. I really want to try and do things myself and find out my way. And I think that's the life skill hack that we need to give to our children and to our parents. As parents, we need to know how to support the child. I think having support groups, with other parents who are grappling, because many things, no manual can teach you. Many things as a parent we do intuitively, right? I mean, just reflect back in your lives and see so many things, you wouldn't know, but you say, I know that something is a little bit, or I know my child very well. So I know this is what they like, this is what they wouldn't, this will work, this will not work. And if you have more than one child, you'll find that one child and the other child will have different styles, even though you will think you're the same parent. So trust that intuition, have the information, talking to more like-minded parents, or parents that are going through similar issues is very supportive. and support your child emotionally, because the biggest life skill is, also knowing that, you have a space where you can be yourself. I think we all need that in relationships, right? Here I want to also point out to parents, all parents, not just the ones who have children with some diagnosis, but the fact that we don't have to have all answers, we don't have to give answers. Our children don't come to us for solutions, not all the time at least. They often come to us to feel safe, to feel trusted, to feel contained, to feel like they can just be whatever that is. And a space where they can lean on without having to worry if they are burdening the other person. Yeah. Or, I mean, because there are these terminologies like trauma dumping, and, there is no, or emotional dumping and all, there is no dumping. It's like when there is a parent space, it's like containing. I mean, can you see the difference in the visual, with the word that you use? So if as parents we're there to support and to deal with our emotions, our own sense of disappointment, our own sense of maybe guilt or shame when you have a child with a diagnosis that you are not okay with. And whereas, sometimes, at least, in many cultures, I should say that, then if a child has any kind of a mental health concern, here I'm expanding to more than ADHD.
Yes.
You don't take them for, social gatherings. You don't take them up, so they're losing out on so many social skills or on life skills. So you don't send them, to the market to buy stuff or to play with other children, because you're just worried that the others may judge your child. And so you try and be protective of your child, but actually what you're doing is also robbing your child of a life skill, of a social skill, of how to relate, how to connect. And like if we didn't let our children crawl and fall as human beings, I think they would even be able to walk. But when there is a diagnosis of our child, we become overprotective. We say, no, I'm not going to let any judgment or any stigma come onto my child.
Yes.
But that can be counterproductive. So, yeah.
Right. So, what are the warning signs that parents miss? High performance masking crisis, withdrawal that reads as introversion, relentless humor. I mean, what are we actually watching out for? How should we equip ourselves to be able to see these signs?
When you see a very sharp change in your child's behavior, I think that's number one for me. Suddenly, and I'm talking about a sudden change in behavior. See, look, normal, regular, natural stress of academics, of, since you mentioned relationship, the breakup, making new friends, the friend tackling on you, the appearance, academic, all of those pressures are normal. Those stresses, the day-to-day stress, even of like, for example, for me setting up this, or for, not being able to hear you properly, so these are natural stresses, and then you sort of get on and you move on. So in a sense, stress and crisis, crisis can happen, as the word suggests, suddenly and on their own. But if stress is not handled in time, and we get used to, our bodies get used to that, 2 hours or 3 hours of sleep and so on and so forth. If we get into that, the prolonged stress, the intense and prolonged stress will become distress. And whereas with stress, you can, work with just going for a run and listening to some music and chatting with a friend, distress will require professional help. Another sign of distress is, if your child suddenly starts, you see a little bit of a glazed look, and maybe, they either start using substance, or if anybody around, not just your child, but anybody, any one of you, if you're just very casual users of any kind of substance, you become more regular users. Somebody who's very happy to be on their own is suddenly going for too many parties, trying to make too many friends. Or another sign is, with the youngsters, I find that when they suddenly start talking about, they start getting very kind of enamored and very engulfed. I don't like the word obsessed because that has a connotation, but very engulfed with the dark and the gothic. And whereas I get it, I get that kind of choices of music and so on. I mean, we've had Kurt Cobain's and everything, but if you find that that's all your child is talking about, or talking about what's the point of life, not just as a philosophical question, but more engaged with those kind of the pointlessness, and you sense some kind of hopelessness in your child, those could be signs that you need to give more attention to your child. You need to spend more time, you need to talk to them. And if you're not able to figure it out yourself, and also not just that you can figure it, they need professional help. It could be a counselor, it could be a therapist, it could be a psychiatrist, depending on what the signs they're showing. And you find them somebody who doesn't really has that style, is muttering by themselves.
We are building that whole relationship of friendship, with them. What as parents should we be then doing? Just the one thing, if we need to, do, what is that to be able to handle this situation when something happens and we find out?
A parent's role, most important role, I would see, is that of like containment, emotional containment, and of providing that emotionally safe space to the child. And what I mean by that is, not just the four walls of the house, but of course, there's physical safety is paramount, and economic safety and all that. But the emotional safety is something that a child looks for from parents. Actually, every family member looks from the family. And that means that, if I were to really talk about containment in very simple words, it would be pretty much what the word says, like, contain any and every emotion that your child brings. So just like a container doesn't really judge whether you're pouring water, oil, or milk or whatever, it just takes it till it can. Similarly, as a parent, I think if we can be emotional containers to our child, where we don't say, oh, but why are you feeling like that? And we've brought you up differently and we don't expect. So there's a lot of judgment that comes because we're judging ourselves very harshly. If we all, I include myself in that as a parent, if we can just be emotional containers to our child, where we just listen to them with whatever they are bringing, without really putting in our judgment, opinion, or anxieties into it.
Every parent has heard limit screen time. What does the research actually show is doing the damage? Because it's not just the hours, is it? Like, it's not the amount of time you're spending, but is it what you're getting exposed to?
So I think what Shweta is trying to ask basically is that how much of a villain is it, or is it unnecessarily demonized? I'm not sure.
This whole world of social media and information is very seductive. And I think what I'm going to put here, rather than saying what is good, what is bad, there's something that the neuroscience tells you, and there is a law called the Hebb's law. So the Hebb's law says that, our brain has neurons, right? And if you remember your class 7 biology, one neuron attaches the other when you do some action, the dendrites, and one dendrite attaches to the other. And that's how the neural connection is made. So imagine if you get used to just everything. I have people talking and suddenly, they are Googling. So you moved away, because if somebody said a word, you start Googling and saying, let me find out, and you get it within seconds. And then, you feel you can be a smart conversationalist, or you can add, but you've taken away from the real connection. You've taken away from, your strength of being or accepting vulnerability.
Here's a question that every parent in this room is potentially asking, which is, how do we get our teenagers to talk to us? Because the door is closed, literally and figuratively, and the harder we knock, the quieter it gets on the other side.
It's important for us to remember what our children need. Belonging, safety, significance becomes even more important. And feeling safe that I can be myself without being judged. Sometimes just that hug. We all know touch is way stronger And in communication, there are so many studies that have pointed out, of course, there are lots of corollaries to it, but largely we all know non-verbal, our touch, our tone of language, our gestures, our posture, the way we look is so much more than the words. All of that just sort of makes a difference. Or are you checking your phone constantly as you're talking to
Are you
your child?
involved? Yeah.
Does it sit with you on the dining table? Is your phone, does that have a designated place on your dining table? So if I'm inside my head, I can't be with you. Human brain can only be with one person, either with myself in my thoughts, or I can listen and see you and be with you. So you choose what you want. So you say, but I'm listening to you and I have the phone. That doesn't happen. That's not happening. I think what we really need to look at is how do we give life skills to our children? How do we build resilience in our children? Because, look at it, now anxiety, stress, they are a part of life now. And post-COVID, we've had a shift. And also, I think the gift, if I may call, of COVID is that it's given us the permission and the language to accept anxiety or talk about I'm anxious. But what does that anxious look like? What anxious looks like for you, Mandira, or for Shweta, will be different than what it looks for me or my child or your child. So, to understand what that anxiety is, how is it playing out, what is it doing? Because, I can't say that reduce the challenge on your child because that's unfair. If your child is bright and if challenge is less, then you've got to support and challenge both. So that balance has to be there. And if the challenge is high and the support is low, that actually results in a lot of problems. And I think it can make a child feel very overwhelmed. But if it is the opposite, that the support is very, very high, I'm a helicopter parent, I'm going to do and rescue you everything, take you in my arms, and the challenge is low because I say I must not put pressure on my child, then they don't really develop the confidence. Yeah,
The balance.
and that's the tricky bit. So you've got to keep doing, you've got to keep trying and saying if it doesn't. It's really like whatever games we played, whether cards or Lego or building the tower. You have to just very carefully just keep looking at the challenge and stop where you feel that's it, and score your points if you can recall the game.
Okay, one question. If every young person listening could hear one true thing from you, not advice, not a message, just the fact.
And every parent, one true thing.
I think what is important is to really help our children see, and for ourselves as well, to say that, look, problems are going to happen. It's natural to feel knocked out, overwhelmed, anxious, hopeless, helpless, but seek help.
All right, rapid fire, true or false, one sentence to the max.
Number one, young people are less resilient than the previous generations.
Oh, absolutely false. Absolutely false. Yeah.
Therapy is only for people who are struggling.
Oh, false. No, therapy is for anyone that's looking for being in a better space than they are.
Parents who've had difficult childhoods raise tougher kids.
No, not necessary. Sometimes they get overprotective and say, because I went through it, I'm not going to let my child go through that.
Talking about your mental health makes it worse.
Oh, no, not at all. Completely false. It actually, talking and not just repeating yourself all the time to different people, but talking to somebody that you trust, that you feel, they have something to offer, or to a professional if that's not somebody in your circuit, is helpful. But if it was just talking about your problem incessantly to different people and without really worrying about how much you trust them and can they keep what you're talking confidential, that can be harmful.
Good grades means a child is doing well.
Academically, but that doesn't mean mental health wise, because good grades can be just a coping mechanism to not look at many other things or to hide other things.
Boys are emotionally simpler than girls.
That's false.
Social media is bad for young people.
No, that's false. It's not bad. It's full of information. It has a lot. It's not. It's how you use what you use it for is that makes all the difference. Not that its presence is making you a bad person essentially or a lesser.
The single most powerful thing a parent can do for their child's mental health is work on their own.
Yes, it's not the single, but it's a very important thing that I think that a parent can do is work on themselves, self-awareness.
Fantastic. Dr. Arvinder, thank you so much. This has been the most enlightening conversation. And for me, the one thing that I've realized is that, like we said, when COVID on the one hand gave a lot of anxiety, I feel it also gave a lot of connection. It gave us that chance to reconnect with our kids, for one, right? And the key takeaway for me is to be the container. Without judgment, we don't need to have the answers. Just sit and be that safe space for them to come and pour whatever it is, anger, gussa, etc., etc. But really enlightening, and really thank you so much.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. The safe space, the balance, how hard we are on ourselves, the expectations, everything. I think you covered everything beautifully, and thank you. This was really, really informative and a very special episode. Thank you, Dr. Arvinder.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. And if this has landed, send it to one parent who needs it. That's how conversations reach the person it was made for.
This is What's the Story with Young Minds today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Thank you.